We are looking at one of our top stories this morning in a bit more detail. Two interviews on this for you. Dubai's Department of Economy and Tourism has relaunched its carbon calculator for the hospitality sector. We are going to be speaking to one hotelier a little bit later on in the show from the Radisson Group to find out how it actually works in practice on the ground. But let's look at what it means for the hospitality sector and its issues as a whole. Very pleased to have an environmental expert with me this morning. Tanzeed is the Managing Director of Earth Matters Consulting, joining me on Teams this morning. Tanzeed, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brandy. Good morning.
When a carbon calculator calculates carbon, what exactly is a carbon calculator calculating?
How many calculators can you say in that? It's basically looks at all kinds of emissions that a business is responsible for. So it could be from its energy use, direct energy use on site, for example, that's called Scope 1 emissions. It's imported electricity, which is called Scope 2 emissions. And then Scope 3, which is usually the biggest part of a business's footprint, includes all of its supply chain. So food that it imports in, waste that it transports out to be landfilled, as well as passenger kilometers traveled from transport, basically from planes or from buses or from cars, for example. So that's called Scope 3 emissions. So it looks at all those three areas.
Well, let's break those down. If we look at Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, how much of a problem does the industry have? How much of an emitter is it?
Sure. Well, according to a study published in Nature in 2018, global tourism is responsible for about 8% of the world's carbon emissions. So, and obviously that was pre-COVID, and now that tourism is bouncing back again with travel restrictions easing, that's all going to increase further. In Dubai, obviously, tourism is a big contributor to the economy. A lot of tourists fly in, so it's probably in check with what's happening globally in terms of the majority of that 8% or the footprint is to do with transport. 49% of it is to do with transport globally, so people flying in from other parts of the world. Then it's followed by use of goods, for example, laundry services. A lot of clothes or sheets, towels, etc., are washed in hotels as well. That's a really important part of their footprint. Food and beverages and so on. Energy use, obviously, in the buildings themselves, and water use.
The water use thing is interesting, and I'm going to admit to being a little bit of a cynic here. Whenever I see, as I did do last night in the hotel that I stayed in down here in Abu Dhabi, the little notice on your bed saying, leave this if you want us not to change the sheets and it will reduce our water consumption, ditto towels. Does that kind of thing actually make a difference?
It does, as long as the people who are involved in cleaning the room take notice of that and do not put it in the laundry. So there's an aspect there of education of the workforce in the hotels as well, which is important. If it reduces the demand on laundry, and then it will have a knock-on effect on reducing the demand on water, it will make a difference, yes.
How much can hotels retrofit themselves to become greener? We know construction is a massive part of the carbon footprint globally. And how much needs to be done in new builds?
So you raise a really critical point there. So what you design is what you're almost embedding into your footprint and how efficient a building can be run. So following the greenest construction standards, whether it's kind of LEED, your green building standards, or BREEAM or Estidama in Abu Dhabi, is absolutely crucial. And even trying to push beyond those, LEED has just announced a Net Zero standard as well. So I think that would be a really important area for new build to align to. So then when you have a really, state-of-the-art carbon efficient building, then it should make it much easier to keep that footprint lower. But obviously it depends on the users. If you keep the AC at 18 degrees, we've all been in hotel rooms which are absolutely freezing and you can't control that thermostat. That can lead to much more inefficient use of energy as well. Similarly, using renewable energy on site to generate electricity or hot water is really important. In the UAE and Dubai in particular, they need permission from DEWA to be able to install solar panels on the premises of the hotels. So there's a bit of a bureaucratic process to get through to do that, but it is possible.
1 minute left with you. What about the stuff that hotels can't control? Those scope 3 emissions, for example, what comes from your external partners. What are we seeing happen there to try and manage that very quickly?
Sure. Well, I think there's a lot that can be done there, in particular partnerships with their supply chain. So hotels are obviously big procurers, so their suppliers want to make them happy and give them more efficient services. It's not just about the lowest cost, it's also going to be measured on the lowest footprint of those goods and services. So a really important partnership, for example, would be between hotels and aviation, for example. So the flights that are bringing in the tourists would be really important for hotels to try and get a grip on, because that's the biggest part of their footprint when people are flying in from abroad. So our airline companies offering their passengers a chance to offset their emissions as part of that flight. Similarly, when it comes to food and beverage providers, are they really looking to import that black cod from Chile through using air miles, or would they be better off looking at a more local, sustainable source of fish in their menu to replace that thousands of air miles flown in? So that's where the partnership with their supply chain is really important. And this is exactly what we, my company as Earth Matters, are helping companies to get to grips with. That scope 3 emissions are really crucial.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure if the Dubai Carbon Footprint calculator is using that yet, but hopefully that would be an area of further improvement in the future.
Thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Tanzeed is Managing Director of Earth Matters Consulting. We are going to be speaking to one hotelier a little bit later in the show this morning. Tim from Radisson is going to be chatting to us about what they're doing on the ground and how they're trying to control the things that they can't control, like their guests.